Market Mantra. Market Mantra. Market Mantra. Market Mantra. Market Mantra. Market Mantra.
Welcome to this edition of Market Mantra, in which you give you a complete update on the economic, business and stock market news of the day. I'm Arjun Chaudhary and with me is my co-anchor in Hindi, Manoj Pathak.
नमस्कार, मार्केट मंत्र के ताजा अंक में आपका स्वागत है। आधे घंटे के इस कार्यक्रम में हमेशा की तरह हम देश और दुनिया की चुनी हुई कारोबारी, आर्थिक और शेयर बाजार से संबंधित ताजा खबरों को लेकर हाजिर हैं। हमारे साथ खबरों पर ऑनलाइन चर्चा के लिए आमंत्रित हैं देश के जाने माने वरिष्ठ आर्थिक पत्रकार पुनीत जैन। पुनीत जी नमस्कार, कार्यक्रम में आपका स्वागत है।
धन्यवाद मनोज जी।
आइए शुरुआत करते हैं अंग्रेजी में हेडलाइन से, जिसे लेकर मौजूद हैं अर्जुन चौधरी।
Domestic markets remain closed today. International markets in Asia and Europe rise after strong U.S. jobs data. Global crude oil prices advance towards $73 per barrel, and export of food processing products can reach $400 billion in the coming year, says Union Minister Prahlad Patel.
घरेलू बाजार अवकाश के कारण बंद। अमेरिका से कल आए रोजगार संबंधी मजबूत आंकड़ों से एशिया और यूरोप के प्रमुख शेयर बाजारों में लिवाली तेज। अंतर्राष्ट्रीय बाजार में कच्चे तेल की कीमत $73 प्रति बैरल की ओर बढ़ी और केंद्रीय मंत्री प्रहलाद सिंह पटेल ने कहा कि आगामी वर्षों में खाद्य प्रसंस्करण उत्पादों का निर्यात $400 अरब तक पहुंच सकता है। घरेलू शेयर बाजार सार्वजनिक अवकाश के कारण आज बंद हैं। हम सीधे चलते हैं वैश्विक बाजारों की ओर। अमेरिका में कल आए रोजगार संबंधी मजबूत आंकड़े और अमेरिका तथा चीन के राष्ट्रपति के बीच फोन वार्तालाप होने संबंधी खबरों का एशियाई शेयर बाजार पर आज अनुकूल असर दिखा है। निवेशकों की सक्रिय भागीदारी और अच्छी खासी लिवाली से जापान का निक्केई 225 सूचकांक 1.3% लाभ के साथ बंद हुआ। चीन के शंघाई कंपोजिट इंडेक्स में 0.3% की वृद्धि हुई। गौरतलब है कि चीन और अमेरिका के राष्ट्रपति के बीच 7 महीनों के दौरान कल पहली बार लगभग 1.5 घंटे तक फोन पर बातचीत हुई। बातचीत के दौरान दुनिया की दो प्रमुख आर्थिक शक्तियों के बीच प्रतिस्पर्धा की होड़ से बचने के मुद्दे पर विशेष रूप से ध्यान दिया गया। उधर हांगकांग का हेंग सेंग लगभग 2% उछाल के साथ बंद हुआ। दक्षिण कोरिया के कोस्पी में 0.4% की वृद्धि हुई। सिंगापुर का स्ट्रेट्स टाइम्स इंडेक्स 0.9% बढ़त में रहा। यूरोपीय बाजार की ओर चलें तो समाचार तैयार किए जाने तक वहां भी लिवाली दिख रही थी। यूरोपीय केंद्रीय बैंक की ओर से बॉन्ड खरीद योजना पर दिए गए ताजा संकेतों के बीच टेक्नोलॉजी और लग्जरी सेक्टर से जुड़ी कंपनियों के शेयरों की लिवाली ठीक ठाक रही। उधर अंतर्दिवसीय कारोबार में लंदन का FTSE 100 0.4% ऊपर चल रहा था, जबकि फ्रांस का CAC 40 और जर्मनी का डेक्स दोनों सूचकांक 0.3% बढ़त के साथ कारोबार कर रहे थे।
And once again, a warm welcome to you, Puneet Jain, for being with us on the program Market Mantra.
Thank you, Arjun.
Puneet, what was the decision of the European Central Bank on interest rates? We saw the European markets, in fact, gained, and they have now signaled a slowdown in the pandemic-era bond purchases. But what has been the decision regarding interest rates?
So, Arjun, they have not made any changes in the interest rate regime. In fact, what you said was the most significant part of the statement. They said that they are only going to adjust, quote unquote, the bond purchases. That means the market was preparing for a reversal of the bond purchases, where they expected ECB to stop bond purchases and therefore curb liquidity in the market. Instead of that, ECB has said that they are only going to reduce bond purchases. That means the quantitative easing, and that too is not happening immediately. So the fear that the central banks in Europe and America will curb liquidity very soon, those fears are kind of receding right now, and therefore that is one of the reasons why markets are also bullish across the world.
पुरी जी, हम आपका ध्यान अमेरिका और चीन दोनों के राष्ट्रपति के बीच जो चर्चा हुई है उसकी ओर ले चलना चाहेंगे। जो बाइडेन से पहले का जो कार्यकाल हमने ट्रंप साहब का देखा था उसमें चीन के साथ लगातार तनातनी की खबरें आती रहती थीं, एक दूसरे के खिलाफ प्रतिबंध के लंबे कहले के दौर हमने देखे हैं। उम्मीद करें कि ये दो आर्थिक महाशक्तियां अब जो आपसी प्रतिस्पर्धा थी उससे निकलकर एक नए युग की शुरुआत होगी इस बातचीत के बाद।
मनोज जी, मुझे ऐसा कोई बहुत बड़ी उम्मीद नहीं है इस बातचीत से, लेकिन जो कंपटीशन है आज अमेरिका और चाइना के बीच में, इकोनॉमिक कह सकते हैं आप, पॉलिटिकल कह सकते हैं, या इकोनॉमिक पॉलिटिकल इसको कह सकते हैं, तो मुझे लगता है कि वो कंपटीशन कोई बहुत जल्दी खत्म नहीं होने वाला नहीं है, क्योंकि वो उसमें काफी बड़ी एक स्ट्रेटेजिक इक्वेशन इन्वॉल्व है। लेकिन मुझे ये ऐसा लगता है कि जो एक बहुत नेगेटिव एनवायरनमेंट अमेरिका और चाइना के बीच में डेवलप हो रहा था, जिसमें कि जिसके अंदर इकोनॉमिक कंपटीशन तो था ही, और मिलिट्री को लेकर की काफी चिंताएं थी। मुझे लगता है कुछ हद तक ये जो चिंताएं हैं उनको शांत करने में इस बातचीत का रोल रहेगा, और दोनों ही पावर्स को रिस्पॉन्सिबली एक्ट करना होगा, ना सिर्फ आपस की कंपटीशन में, बल्कि जो सेंसिटिव सब्जेक्ट्स हैं जैसे अफगानिस्तान, जहां पर चाइना का काफी अब इन्फ्लुएंस है, तो उन्हें वहां भी रिस्पॉन्सिबली एक्ट करना पड़ेगा। और मुझे लगता है कि इन्हीं मुद्दों को लेकर उनकी बातचीत रही होगी। और पर इम्पोर्टेंट बात यह है कि मार्केट्स जो है वर्ल्ड वाइड, उससे मार्केट्स ने कुछ सांत्वना ली है। उनको लगता है कि जो एक गर्मा गर्मी का माहौल था उसमें थोड़ा सा शांति आएगी, एंड दैट इज गुड फॉर इकोनॉमिक वेलबींग ऑफ द वर्ल्ड।
Puneet, we usually talk about what's happening with the US market and the Asian market, specifically India, but we also have this Tuesday the release of the second quarter GDP estimates for the Euro area. How is Europe performing right now in terms of its productivity?
So the Euro numbers have been, I would say, they have been in line with estimates and slightly better. Of course, the first quarter, which was the June quarter, turned out to be slightly disappointing because of the surge of second wave of coronavirus. However, so there is a nuancing here. So markets expected the numbers to be much worse, and rather we got numbers which are okay. I mean, it doesn't show that the market is the economy is collapsing once again, and in fact it can rebound quite strongly. So I think to that extent the expectation was that ECB will tighten rates and tighten liquidity. However, I think the central bankers are still wary of doing that. So in that sense, I think the numbers from ECB, from the Eurozone, have been pretty supportive of economic growth. Even in America, see, the job numbers which came yesterday were not very good. However, again, they reinforce the belief that the US Fed will not tighten liquidity very quickly. They will take their own time, and they will do it in an easy manner. And therefore, the market, which was in this grip of greed and fear. In fact, if you look at the past few weeks and months, market has been in this grip of alternate bouts of greed and fear. No, we fear at one point of time that markets are too overvalued and they will fall, and then suddenly, the markets they are behaving in a particular manner, and everybody gets greedy, and then the markets start going up. So this alternate ups and downs in the markets, they are quite accentuated right now because we are in uncharted waters as far as markets are concerned. I think that is playing out. So one day you have greed and another day you have fear. And if you ask me, I think this will continue for some more time. It is not going away in a hurry. I think next few months we are going to be facing these kinds of alternate bouts of greed and fear.
Puneet, just coming back to China, because you have covered the Asian market performance, especially their equity markets. On the macroeconomic front, China released its inflation numbers on Thursday, with commodity prices either going up or down in this period of volatility. How is China affected by it, and what are those numbers?
So China came out with numbers, and China's numbers again, the most important thing about China again was that the GDP growth was just about 6%, 6.5%. Now the markets were expecting the GDP growth to be more than 7%. And combined with that, they had inflation numbers which are much higher than expected. So clearly China is facing this challenge where they have cost pressures, and at the same time the economic growth is not that rapid. in fact, one of the reasons for the markets to become slightly jittery last few days was because of China numbers. China had higher inflation and lower GDP growth. So than the market had expected. So clearly, China's economy continues to be some kind of a puzzle for us to understand. Of course, China has done a couple of things to curb inflation. They have released their strategic petroleum reserves. They have now said that they released them in the month of July, which was last month, and which should cool oil prices. That is what they expect. So, of course, China is facing this inflation pressure driven partly by oil prices, partly by commodity prices. And they're trying to bring those prices down. But again, I think commodity prices is a big challenge, not only for China, for the whole world. So, but yes, you're right. Inflation in numbers in China were much higher than the market expected.
Just as my co-anchor had put the question to you, there was this telephonic call between the two presidents, Xi Jinping and Joe Biden of the U.S. There is obviously some optimism and relief for traders, but how does the stimulus or the lack of tapering by the Federal Reserve affect China in any which way?
So it does not affect China directly, but of course indirectly, because if the US is generating more liquidity, then a part of that liquidity goes to all markets, and therefore China benefits. In fact, you will be surprised that even in the last few months, when there's been a lot of anti-China sentiment in USA, and there's been a very big fall in Chinese stocks, a lot of money from US went into Chinese bonds. In fact, there was a huge inflow of US dollars into Chinese bonds during the last few months. Excess liquidity means that it flows into all markets, and China being a very big market, it does benefit from that liquidity. But I don't think China is right now looking for that excess liquidity, because they seem to be quite comfortable with the kind of reserves they have and the kind of firepower they have in terms of money. But yes, China will benefit if the US continues to pump in more liquidity into markets like any other market. But I must say that India has been a big beneficiary of a lot of those flows over the past few months. And I think we will continue to benefit in an outsized manner if that liquidity continues to be easy. It's
a very interesting point you made about China, the bond purchases being made by U.S. investors because of the stimulus. What about the Chinese central bank? Are they still buying into Treasury notes and bonds of the U.S. Fed Reserve, which has helped the U.S. meet its expenditure, even though they have a huge fiscal deficit? Was that continuing during the Trump era? Did they discontinue it? And is it being recontinued now by the Chinese policymakers?
So that's an interesting question, in fact. And a lot of people have thought about it. We do not have any statement from China stating whether they are buying U.S. Treasury or not at present, but we believe that they are no longer buying U.S. Treasury. In fact, China's foreign exchange reserves, so to say, they have fallen from about $4 trillion to about $3.3 trillion recently. So clearly, China is no longer stocking up on the U.S. Treasuries as much as it used to do. As far as investment in China is concerned, there are two schools of thoughts in US. So in fact, a couple of days back, George Soros, who is a very, very respected name in the investment markets, he wrote an article in Wall Street Journal criticizing investments in China. He said that no big house in USA should make any investment in China at the risk of losing money for the investors, as well as on a political consideration. So, and there are houses like BlackRock in USA, which is the world's largest fund manager, and they have been putting money into China. So, Chinese investments continue to be kind of to draw different schools of thoughts. But yes, I think China right now continues to be, I can't put a finger on it, but it is quite an enigma right now, I would say.
But how has George Soros put a finger on that? I mean, he has speculated with the British pound sterling, and he made $1 billion out of that. He has a quantum fund. Does he not profit by currency manipulation of either the yuan or the US dollar?
So you are right. So George Soros actually went head-to-head with Bank of England and defeated Bank of England in a currency war, and therefore he became so famous. But the truth is that George Soros in his article said that there's, first of all, he thinks that China itself poses a huge risk to investors' money. So anybody who's putting money into Chinese stocks and Chinese economy, George Soros feels that they're liable to lose a lot of money, and therefore he's warning investors like BlackRock that they should not invest their investors' money into China. Secondly, he has said that it is China and US are at conflict in terms of strategic interest, and therefore it is also, he has said, it compromises the security interests of USA to invest in China. So on those two fronts, that is his opinion. I'm not saying he's right or wrong, but he's quite vocal about it, and he's written about it quite openly.
Well, let's have a look at the U.S. market now. U.S. markets reversed earlier gains yesterday as investors weighed uncertainty over the central bank tapering and economic recovery due to the coronavirus Delta variant alongside strong U.S. weekly jobless claims data. So the Dow Jones Industrial Average fell 152 points, 0.4% to 34,879. The S&P 500 lost 21 points, 0.5% to 4,493. And the Nasdaq Composite Index dropped 38 points, 0.3% to 15,248. The U.S. Labor Department said initial claims for state unemployment benefits dropped by 35,000 to a seasonally adjusted 310,000 for the week ended September 4th, the lowest level since mid-March 2020. That suggested that jobs growth could be hindered by labor shortages rather than cooling demand for workers. Microsoft, Apple and Amazon each declined, all three among the stocks weighing the most on the S&P 500 and Nasdaq. JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, Citigroup and Morgan Stanley each rose, tracking a slightly rise in benchmark bond yields following the claims data. Puneet, in Money Matters this afternoon, I asked you about why the large companies had declined, and you answered. And then now we also have the financial companies which went up, and there is a concern once again amongst the public in the U.S. that Wall Street is once again benefiting, and the financial sector is now roughly 9% of GDP. What does this tell us about the U.S. economy right now and the stock valuation of these companies?
So Arjun, this is a classic debate which takes place whenever government tries to stimulate the economy, because there are sectors, there is a sequential manner in which sectors benefit. So first the money flows into financial sector because that is where banks are and banks benefit and they start lending to other financial companies. So typically we find that financial sector benefits the first. However, then the financial sector, as it starts lending to consumers and to companies, then you will find that industrial sectors, commodities, they will start benefiting. And that is what is happening in this case also. Like in the US, and across the world, what we are witnessing is that it is not actually demand shock which is creating inflation, it is a supply shock. It is not that the demand has gone up very sharply and therefore it is leading to inflation. In US, like you just read out the numbers on labor numbers, and it said that it is because of shortage of labor that the numbers are actually less. And so it's kind of a supply shock which is in the economy, and therefore in such a situation it is difficult for other sectors of the economy to perform, and financials, of course, because they have excess liquidity, they appear to be doing much better. But hopefully there will be a trickle down effect, and money will flow from financials to other sectors, like we are witnessing in some areas like technologies, like commodities, manufacturing. In fact, in India we have got numbers today for manufacturing sector and they appear to be very good. So clearly they will benefit, but only after financials, that money flows from financials.
पुनीत जी, रोजगार संबंधी जो आंकड़े आए हैं पिछले सप्ताह के, वो क्या दर्शा रहे अमेरिकी अर्थव्यवस्था को लेकर?
देखिए, उनको दो प्रकार से देखा जा सकता है. एक्चुअली में जो नंबर्स आए थे वो बहुत अच्छे नहीं थे, उम्मीद से कम उसमें जो रोजगार थी वो आया था. तो लेकिन फिर भी आप कहेंगे कि बाजार क्यों बढ़ा? इससे दो कारण थे. पहला कारण ये था कि जो आंकड़े आए उससे ये बात साबित हो गई कि यूएस फेडरल रिजर्व इंटरेस्ट रेट्स बहुत जल्दी नहीं बढ़ाएगा, क्योंकि वो नहीं चाहते कि इकोनॉमी को डीरेल करें या जॉब्स को वो डीरेल करें, और वो चाहेंगे कि लंबे अरसे तक वो इजी मनी पॉलिसी रखे. तो बाजार में एक उसको लेकर उत्साह बना. दूसरा कारण ये था कि जो हमने जब आंकड़ों का एनालिसिस करते हैं तो हम ये देखते हैं कि वहां पर एम्प्लॉयमेंट नंबर इसलिए कम नहीं आए थे कि वहां एम्प्लॉयमेंट अपॉर्चुनिटी की कमी थी, वहां पर वर्कर्स की शॉर्टेज थी, यानी जो वर्कर्स जॉब मार्केट में आ रहे हैं वो उतने नंबर्स नहीं थे। तो जिसको सप्लाई शॉक का नाम दिया कि सप्लाई नहीं है लेबर की, और इस वजह से वो आंकड़े कम आ रहे हैं। तो उससे भी एक ये उम्मीद जगती है कि आने वाले समय में जब थोड़ी सी इकोनॉमी रीओपन होगी तो ये जॉब नंबर्स जो है वो बहुत फास्ट, यानी लेबर के लिए डिमांड तो है लेकिन सप्लाई कम है। तो इन दोनों वजह से मुझे लगता है कि बाजार में भी उत्साह था, और ये मुझे भी संकेत करते हैं कि आने वाले समय में इकोनॉमिक जो रीओपनिंग होगी उससे बेहतर नंबर आएंगे।
पुनीत जी, ये जो आपूर्ति और मांग संबंधी जो कह लें कि आंकड़े सामने हैं, उसमें क्या ऐसे अवसर बनते दिख रहे हैं भारत से जो वीसा लेके वहां काम के लिए, रोजगार के लिए जाते हैं, उनमें जो कुशल कर्मी हैं हमारे देश के, उनके लिए वहां रोजगार की दृष्टि से अवसर बढ़ते नजर आ रहे हैं इन आंकड़ों से?
बिल्कुल मनोज, इसमें कोई शक नहीं है, लेकिन मैं आपको ये बता, इसका एग्जाम्पल हमारे सामने है। इस साल जो H1B वीजा, यानी जो वर्कर्स को जो वीजा दिया जाता है, भारत से जो जाते हैं और वर्कर्स को वीजा मिलता है, उसका रिजेक्शन रेट सबसे कम हुआ है पिछले कई वर्षों में। यानी जितने लोगों ने H1B अप्लाई किया था इंडियंस ने, उसमें सबसे ज्यादा परसेंटेज लोगों को कई वर्षों में इस साल वीजा मिला है। तो ये बात साफ है कि जो अमेरिका है वो अपनी जो वर्कर्स हैं, जो स्किल्ड वर्कर्स हैं, उनको बुलाना चाहती है, और मुझे लगता है भारत का उसको डेफिनेटली फायदा होगा।
What is it about the mining sector that is dominating the IIP data?
So mining, we got the numbers today, in fact, for IIP today. So month on month, if you look at July on June, the numbers are not very good. But of course, year on year, the numbers are more than 10% plus. Also, electricity, which is somewhat linked to mining, that is growing very rapidly. That has gone up by more than 10% again this year. So clearly, whenever the consumption goes up in the economy, and we have seen Indian GDP growing rapidly, the IIP numbers have shown again 10%, around 10% or more than 10% growth. So clearly, the domestic consumption in India appears to be very strong, and therefore, I think mining, electricity, core sector numbers, all these numbers, they tell us that the economy is coming back on track even after the second wave hit us in April, May this year.
And what about manufacturing and capital goods? Is this the China effect or China plus effect?
Arjun, actually, see, you don't see that effect so fast, because setting up a factory or setting a manufacturing facility takes 2 to 3 years. Therefore, I don't expect that India will start showing these numbers, manufacturing numbers, significantly higher in immediate future, maybe after 2 years or 3 years, when these factories actually come into place. But I think already, if you see the capacity utilization has been higher, and very interestingly, the capital goods sector is showing a growth. So we have 14% growth in capital goods sector in July over June, which tells us that companies are willing to reinvest. See, one of the problems with the economy has been that companies have not been able to reinvest in fresh capacities. I think that is beginning to change. And these numbers are only indicative. I can't say that these numbers are conclusive, but these numbers are definitely indicative that companies are beginning to rethink, and they are willing to start reinvesting in the economy.
Puneet, do you see this being factored in when markets reopen on Monday, and will it open at a high, or will there be a correction in the market?
So right now, what we are learning from the futures data on the SGX and what is happening in the US. The US futures are Dow futures are about 200 points up, and no, markets generally are bullish, and SGX futures also showing that market is up by about 70-80 points. So I expect markets to open higher on Monday. As of now, I don't know what happens later today, but as of now, it is indicating that markets will open higher on Monday.
Well, now let's have a look at our third headline story. Union Minister of State for Food Processing Industries, Prahlad Singh Patel, has said that the export of food processing products can reach $400 billion in the coming years. He said the government has taken several steps to bridge the demand-supply gap and reduce the wastage of food items in the last 7 years. In an interview with AIR News, Mr. Patel said the government is providing technical and financial support to farmers and entrepreneurs so that cheaper and quality products can be prepared in the country. Very briefly, what's your take on food processing? And there is also news circulating about the biogas production from food produce waste.
So, of course, I think food processing sector has enormous potential in India. We have been talking about it for decades. somehow it is not materialized to the extent that it was anticipated. Also, it is important because it is linked to agriculture sector, which is again employs almost 60% of the Indian workforce. So I think we really need to focus on that and realize its potential. We all know it is there, but unfortunately it has not reached that potential that it could have. In this entire pandemic, India has been one of the few countries there has been no shortage of food at all. Many countries we know there's a food emergency right now. And India has been very comfortable because of its large food production. So I think we have enormous scope there, and hopefully government is taking all these steps and they will bear fruit.
आइए खबरों का सिलसिला आगे बढ़ाएं। सरकार ने कहा है कि वह चालू वित्तीय वर्ष में निर्यातकों की बकाया 56,000 करोड़ रुपए से अधिक की निर्यात प्रोत्साहन राशि जारी कर देगी। वाणिज्य मंत्री पीयूष गोयल ने कहा कि 45,000 से अधिक निर्यातकों को इसी वर्ष ये राशि वितरित की जाएगी। श्री गोयल ने कहा कि इससे क्षेत्र में नकदी प्रवाह बनाए रखने और अंतर्राष्ट्रीय बाजार में निर्यात मांग पूरी करने में मदद मिलेगी। ये राशि 12,454 करोड़ रुपए निर्यात उत्पाद शुल्क और कर छूट तथा 6,946 करोड़ रुपए की पहले घोषित राज्य और केंद्रीय लेवी और कर छूट योजना के अतिरिक्त होगी। भारत के निर्यात में हाल के महीनों में बढ़ोतरी हुई है। निर्यात सेक्टर पर हम आपका ध्यान आकृष्ट करते हुए समझना चाहेंगे कि किन क्षेत्रों में हम देख रहे हैं कि हमारा निर्यात बढ़ रहा है और जैसे जैसे दुनिया की स्थितियां बदल रही हैं वैक्सीन के बाद किस दिशा में हम बढ़ेंगे?
देखिए, हम ये बात भारत का कुछ नेचुरल स्ट्रेंथ रही है। जैसे हमारा जो एक्सपोर्ट्स रहे हैं वो फार्मास्यूटिकल्स में बहुत अच्छे रहे हैं। टेक्सटाइल्स में हमने कुछ हद तक काफी पीछे दिनों प्रोग्रेस करी है। आईटी से रिलेटेड कुछ प्रोडक्ट्स हैं जो सॉफ्टवेयर में, उसमें हम इंडिया ग्रोथ अच्छी रही है। लेकिन जो हमें जरूरत है वो मैन्युफैक्चरिंग सेक्टर यानी इंजीनियरिंग प्रोडक्ट्स हैं या उस प्रकार के जो प्रोडक्ट्स हैं वहां पर ग्रोथ की जरूरत है। पिछले 2-3 वर्षों में हमने देखा है गवर्नमेंट ने काफी अच्छी स्कीम्स निकाली हैं इंसेंटिवाइज करने के लिए एक्सपोर्ट्स को, और उन जो फाइनेंशियल इंसेंटिव दिए जाते हैं उनको डिस्ट्रीब्यूट करना बहुत जरूरी है। कई बार वो स्कीम सिर्फ पेपर पे रह जाती है और उसका इम्प्लीमेंटेशन नहीं होता। तो मुझे उम्मीद है जो आपने आंकड़े दिए हैं आज, उससे बात साफ है कि सरकार जो जितने भी ड्यूज हैं, और जनरली एक्सपोर्टर्स की ये कंप्लेंट रहती है कि उनके ड्यूज उनको मिलते नहीं है, बकाया रहते हैं, तो वो यदि क्लियर होते हैं तो मुझे लगता है कि पूरे एक्सपोर्ट सेक्टर को काफी फायदा होगा। और नंबर्स में देखें, एक्सपोर्ट्स हैव बीन डूइंग वेरी वेल इन लास्ट मेनी मंथ्स।
Well, let's have a look at the factory output data, or IIP. Country's industrial production rose 11.5% in July, according to official data released on Friday. As per IIP released by MSO, the capital goods index rose the most in July at 29.5%, followed by mining at 19.5%. Power generation jumped 11.1%, while manufacturing sector's output surged 10.5% in July. Moving on to the oil market, Brent crude oil futures rose $1.3 to $72.79 a barrel, and U.S. crude was also up $1.3 at $69.45 a barrel. Puneet, there was the earlier event of Hurricane Ida, which hit the Gulf of Mexico, and that was able to reduce supply of oil. But now we have China also announcing plans to sell crude from its strategic reserves via a public auction. Where is this coming in? Very briefly.
So China is trying to bring down oil prices because, of course, China is the world's largest importer of oil. We are the second largest, they are the world's largest. So clearly, China wants to bring oil prices down, and it's unique. They've never done it. This is the first time in the history of China that they're selling crude oil from the strategic reserves. Right. So it shows the intent to bring down prices.
आइए अब चलें सर्राफा बाजार। घरेलू सर्राफा बाजार में आज सोने और चांदी की चमक फीकी रही। मल्टी कमोडिटी एक्सचेंज में अक्टूबर महीने में आपूर्ति किए जाने वाले सोने का मूल्य 65 रुपए घटकर 46,973 रुपए प्रति 10 ग्राम पर आ गया। दिसंबर में आपूर्ति होने वाली चांदी 33 रुपए घटकर 64,150 रुपए प्रति किलो रह गई। बस यहीं पर श्रोताओं की ओर से पुनीत हम आपको बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद देना चाहेंगे।
धन्यवाद मनोज जी।
And before we close, a reminder of the headlines. Domestic markets remain closed today. International markets in Asia and Europe rise after a strong U.S. jobs data. Global crude oil prices advance towards $73 a barrel. And export of food processing products can reach $400 billion in the coming years, says Union Minister Prahlad Patel. And that's it in this edition of Market Mantra for now. Goodbye.